Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everybody into Garden of Doom, and this week we have with us a true academic who's also a pagan. He's a professor, and I became acquainted with him through, as is often the case, the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. He was one of the presenters there, but we're not really going to be talking about Nephilim, or I don't think so anyway, but we might, who knows. You never know. Anyway, I welcome to the program and thank you for joining us, Professor Michael York.
Good evening or afternoon, whatever it is with these time lags, who knows. But, all right, I'm going to try to just give a brief summary of my trajectory. I was living in San Francisco during the counterculture days, which anyone who if you ever meet anyone from that time, the one thing we all have in common is to say that we would never have wanted to miss those days. My daughter is actually visiting right now. When she found out that she missed the Haight-Ashbury experience, she actually cried. So she's been out to the Burning Man experience in Spain, the spin-off, and was just completely at home. So somehow that genetic thing does carry through, which is nice to see. But when I was living in San Francisco, I used to go out into the country just to get away from the whole urban complex. And I was so overwhelmed by the stars that I could see in the sky when you were away from any type of city lighting. And I became very intrigued in what did the indigenous people, what stories did they have about these stars, because they were so overwhelming. And that got me basically interested in the Central California Indian cultures, basically centered around San Francisco Bay area. They were it was a fascinating territory. It had more different languages spoken in that one area after, I think, maybe Java is the only other place that has more different languages spoken. And the thing is that they all got along. They had one kind of a ritual warfare between two tribes in the north, where one year one person was killed in one tribe and the next year then one was killed in the other. And that was the extent of their violence. Basically, even though they all spoke these different languages, they shared a certain understanding of nature, of the understanding, let's say, what we would call the divine. Ironically, they had almost no stories about the stars. They named a few of the major constellations that we know, like the Great Bear and so forth. But basically, it was really surprising for me. But what it did for me was to discover this really beautiful culture that my ancestors coming over from Europe basically decimated and destroyed it. And I felt a cultural guilt, I suppose. And I thought, well, what do I do? Do I live in a teepee? And I wasn't ready for doing something like that. So I moved to Europe, to where my ancestors came from. And that was the Netherlands, at least one part of the family. But what the whole research thing that I had done in California into looking into the Native American traditions, I then wanted to do the same thing with the European peoples. Where did they come from? What were their earliest spiritual outlooks? What was their understanding of the divine, the relationship of humanity with the divine, and so forth. And I ultimately wrote what I would call my magnum opus, The Divine versus the Assyrian. But then to try to get it published was the next big obstacle. And since it was basically an academic book, the only type of a press that would consider it would be a university press. And really, for them to consider you had to have a PhD. So I went to King's College London, which had a place in London. It was only 5 stops away on the Underground line. I didn't have to change lines. And the other alternative would have been to go to the Indo European Studies Department in UCLA. I was not ready to come back to the United States, so I went to King's College. The director was Keith Ward, and he said, well, that's very interesting, but there's nobody here that could really monitor you. And by this point, I didn't care. I just wanted to get a PhD. I wanted to study religion from an academic point of view. And so I mentioned that. He said, well, you have to see Peter Clark. He's the only one who could possibly accommodate you. So I saw Peter. I had just read in the Herald Tribune the day before about this new religious movement involving Shirley MacLaine and J.C. Knight, calling itself New Age. So I mentioned that to Peter, and he just snapped his fingers and said, yes. So basically, I did my PhD, started initially on the New Age movement. As I got more familiar with the whole academic scene and how to handle various issues, I expanded it to a contrast between New Age and contemporary paganism. So that became my PhD. I graduated, was able to get my book published, and so forth. But then, of course, it was just at a time when I graduated, and by this point, it was rather late in life by the time I went and did my PhD. I absolutely loved it, and I would say to anyone, if you're ever thinking of going back into study, it's never too late. And I think it almost becomes more thrilling, satisfying, and exciting as one gets older. You appreciate it from a whole different perspective than at least I did when I did love it in my 20s, but it was wonderful when I turned 50. And so, but when I graduated, I then was hooked on the whole academic scene. It was at a time where universities, both in America and Britain and probably Europe as well, were having to cut back on their teaching staffs. It was a financial situation. And so it was really very hard I couldn't find anything. I went to different conferences and just got to know as many different people as I could. And then at this point, my partner and I, we moved back to San Francisco, bought a house, and came back to Europe just to check on the properties. And literally walking out the door of the London flat to go to a farm we had in France, the phone rang. It was Marion Bowman, and she said, there's a research fellowship available at Bothwell University. It wasn't quite Bothwell University at that point. It was the Bath College of Higher Education. And she said, would you be interested? And I said, well, yes. And ultimately, I got that job. And so that I was on that research fellowship. It was probably one of the most ideal jobs one could have. The salary wasn't great, but other than that, I was encouraged to travel. I didn't have to teach. I wanted to, and so I actually did do some teaching. But I was allowed to go to India, back to the States. I was on a complete research venue. And so that was really an exciting and thrilling time. But then finally that fellowship was running out. I had a PhD student, Nicholas Campion, who was interested in astrology. And what I didn't know that what Nick was doing was he was seeing the administrators of the school. He had money behind him, and they wanted to establish a department for the study of astrology from an academic perspective. And he wanted me to be the director. And ultimately, I got that job, and through that, I ultimately got my professorship. I was very insistent that we weren't going to try to teach astrology as whether it was real or not, but how people are influenced by their belief in various things of the stars. For instance, like India, when it became independent, they changed their original date of independence because the stars weren't right. And so it was this kind of thing that I was interested in. Most of the students turned out to be astrologers, and they weren't all that happy from a sociological perspective, trying to look at themselves objectively. But we got through it, and that was quite successful. And then I turned 65, and that was a mandatory time in Britain at that point that one had to retire. But basically, that was my academic trajectory. As far as the pagan thing, I got very intrigued with what we could call the original pagan outlook and beliefs of the Indo European peoples from their homeland. They basically split. Some went to Persia and India, and the rest came to Europe. And but to try to find a contemporary pagan scene I found it was almost impossible. I would go to Stonehenge, to Delphi, to the Roman Forum, all these different ancient sites on what I knew were the actual key festivals, the solstices, the equinoxes, the Celtic quarter festivals, thinking I was going to run into other people, and never did. Finally, somehow, I don't know exactly how I came across it, but I learned of the House of the Goddess, which was run in Clapham in London by Sean J. Rod. And through her, I was able to then connect with the pagan scene. She agreed to let me study her outfit for my PhD studies. And basically, that's how I expanded within the pagan scene. I've written a number of books since on pagan theology, pagan ethics, pagan mysticism. I have now, I'm still trying to get it published. I've written my memoir. I think we're going to try to do it through Amazon, but I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. So, but basically that's my story.
Okay. Well, that is an interesting story with a long and winding tale. And I'm looking forward to hearing about there. It's an interesting thing when you're a podcaster who's didn't really have a vision for a show, just knew that you were curious about a lot of things, and you come to certain conclusions, and it turns out that through listening to people and through distilling and curating the information that you get, that you come to certain conclusions, to learn that you're probably correct, and then you feel pretty smart about yourself. And then you find out that, well, tons of people have already figured this out, and then you don't feel so smart about yourself anymore because you're not special. But it's very interesting because this is an interesting synchronicity, because it's only very recently that I started to suspect that if we found the root of sort of the first Indo-European language, we would sort of find the original myths and sort of where things came from, and sort of the root of everything, and maybe sort of grow from there. Well, turns out lots of people did that. And also one of the other panelists on the Nephilim conference, Luke Ironside, who, I mean, he's like 27 years old, but I'm sure he's a vampire because he's got the wisdom of like a 10,000-year-old person, said, doesn't sound to me like you're looking for the first language. It sounds to me like you're really looking for the first shaman. And I'm just like, or shaman. And I'm like, ooh, I'm not sure I can get to that one, but at least I have another, semi-mission. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to our conversation, but before we get to that, and I forget, I have some trivial questions for you, which have almost nothing to do with what we've talked about, except you mentioned that your family is from the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is also known as Holland. And the Netherlands, as I understand it, means the flatlands, loosely in English.
Yes.
Where does the name Holland come from? Because I don't think there was a tribe called the Halls or the Holes.
That's a good question. I don't know the actual answer. Holland there's actually two provinces within the Netherlands, North and South Holland. And so when we refer to the country as Holland, that's actually incorrect. I think I did know what the etymology behind that is, but I can't recall it at this point. The Netherlands is the Netherlands, where the country is basically below sea level.
Right.
And it's because they have this incredible system of dikes, which is what allows the land to be. We're at the base of the Rhine, so it's really, the country in itself is really a swamp or a marshland. And the Dutch people, this was kind of like a refuge. Nobody else wanted to live here, and so they came in and basically created the country. One thing that's fascinating is that the governmental department that takes care of the dikes is totally independent. It doesn't matter which political party is present at any time. They just go ahead and do their own thing. Their focus is on the technological skills and needs to protect the country. And so the government doesn't have anything that they can really do to them. They don't interfere. And it's a fascinating thing. And the Dutch are so skilled at that they export their knowledge around the world. And with global warming, it's really an opportune skill that they have acquired that they can export to many other places.
They're going to be busy. Well, all right. I'll continue my search for what the word Holland means, but understanding is that it being synonymous for the Netherlands is a construction that it's actually an error, but maybe it is what it is. So right north of the Netherlands is Denmark, which is also a strange name, but I know that Denmark used to be called Jutland. Now, that could be because there was a tribe called the Jutes or Juts, but it could also be because the land actually juts out into the sea like that, but that would be very English, but English, of course, is a Germanic language. So, and I know this is not what we were talking about, but while I have you and I have a professor who's been there, what is the origin of Jutland or Denmark, if you know?
Denmark, I'm not sure. The Jutes was a name like the Angles, like the Saxons. The Jutes, it was a tribal name.
That's easy. Okay, good.
They basically settled there, and that's why it's whether the name Jut, because it juts out from the rest of the continent, that might have been derived from them. That would be something
that's
to be
interesting.
curious into.
See, these are things that this is what that makes me curious and things that get me on little tangents, which is this one. But let's get back to you and your areas of expertise. And I mean, you are the expert on this. So take us through, sort of what your thesis is, or what you've learned, and what you want to share with us. And I wonder if any of it will call back to the North American First Nations and any of their beliefs that you came to learn.
All right. Basically, when I started doing my research into the origins of European-speaking peoples, I used a comparative mythological basis along with archaeology. And when you compare the languages and you try to see what common denominators there are, and especially when you're dealing with myth, ritual, and I suppose broadly theology, there's a handful of core paradigms, and probably the most ubiquitous is the Indo-European word for God, which is Deus, which means light. It's a personification of light. If you look into now, of course, we've been influenced a lot by Hesiod, but Hesiod himself was influenced by the succession myth of the Near East, which you had a father god and a son, and the son overthrows the father, and then the son of the son overthrows his father, and so forth. That's an imported idea. That wasn't probably originally an Indo-European idea. For the Indo-Europeans, you start with the earth, the mother earth, Gaia, among the Greeks, and she has potential to give birth to her counterpart, who is her male son, who becomes her consort. That male son is Deus, is the embodiment of light. So earth gives birth to light, and then the two of them together produce the gods that we know. There is a strange story. This goes, and a lot of people don't like this. It upsets a lot of people in our contemporary way of thinking. But their first child, there's two versions. One is that the Earth Mother produced two twins, the Sky Father, so to speak, the embodiment of light, personification of light, and the Moon, and they were the primordial twins. But the first child between the Deus principle and the terrestrial principle was the goddess Dawn. Now, she was gorgeous and stunningly beautiful, and the father fell in love with the daughter. Now, in some versions, he rapes her. Other versions, she's quite willing. And they produce a child, and their child is the sun. And so you end up with basically 5 proto-figures of basically the original pantheon. And that would be the earth, light, the sun, moon, and the dawn. And to that, they're already incorporated within that 5 are the twins of the Deus and the moon. But they also reified the divine duality, the divine twins, and they overlapped with the primal 5, and they were also additional to the primal 5. So the heart of what we could say is the Indo-European or Proto Indo European pantheon is, I've called it a heptatheon. There's 7 basic figures, and they're all nature oriented. And this is where the Proto Indo European theology is a too clumsy a word, but for lack of a better one, I'll just say theological outlook, corresponds to the Native American, to ancient Egyptian, to the peoples that we could identify as having this kind of nature-oriented pagan spirituality at their core, at their original understanding of the world in which they lived. And basically, there's the whole. I learned this through Ake Holtkrantz, the Swedish. I think he was an anthropologist. He did a whole study on Native Americans, and he discerned that they had a belief in two souls. We each have two souls. We have a life soul, which is what animates the body, but we also have what is known as a dream soul or a free soul. The consciousness develops with the body soul, but when one sleeps or goes into shamanic trance, the consciousness shifts from the life or body soul to the free or dream soul. So the experiences we have in trance, in dream, are the times when the consciousness has transferred to that particular soul. Almost universal, and I found that almost all indigenous peoples throughout the world had some sort of a concept of soul duality, of these two souls. Basically, if consciousness did not re-assimilate with the body soul when one ended trance or woke up from sleep, the person went mad in cultural social understandings and usually died within about 6 months. But so the normal thing, and especially for the shaman, is that reincorporation of the consciousness that has had its experiences in the dream soul, but back into the body soul. The shaman had a very definite social function that was to help cure, help bring back knowledge from the other world for the benefit of the tribe, for the community. A shaman could be both male or female. Some peoples had more male shamans and some had more female shamans. But the shaman has this responsibility to the tribe, and it's also the duty to the tribe, which I think is partly which helps the shaman reincorporate those otherworldly experiences into a practical applicability and to allow the shaman to cogently function as a person, not go insane, not die because of some split thing between the souls. So, and apparently the general belief is that when one is about to die or at the time of death, that the consciousness of the body soul transfers permanently to the free soul, and the free soul goes on to the other world with one's consciousness. So in the whole concept of reincarnation, it makes sense to me to think of the free soul when we're born, and if we are a reincarnation, we tend not to remember our earlier lives, unless we're Shirley MacLaine and some princess in Egypt or something like that. But I think what it is that the departed life consciousness becomes one's guardian spirit. And it's the guardian spirit, which is our free soul. When our present body dies, our consciousness will then merge with that free soul. So the free soul is constantly building up consciousnesses from previous lives. But the basic purpose of the free soul is to assist and benefit the life of the individual that it's being the guardian spirit for it at that particular time. So you always have this kind of duality throughout all this kind of pagan spirituality. I talked about Deus and the moon being maybe the primordial twins. Well, the moon is emblematic ultimately of it's the food of the god. It's the soma. It's ambrosia. And that's why the moon disappears, because the gods are consuming the moon. And so the real duality is between humanity and let's say our psychedelic counterpart that is more at home in the other world, and the two of them constitute the core notion behind Proto Indo European duality. Of course, as the Indo-European peoples disseminated into the different areas, they developed their own pantheons, but they all can basically be traced and descending from this basic original proto-pantheon or the heptatheon.
And the moon is a deity, so the moon, while being consumed, regenerates. Is that sort of how the theory goes?
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So the moon's like the god Wolverine, like from the X-Men. It keeps healing.
Right. And the moon is, among the Greeks and the Romans, the moon was understood as female. Among the Baltic and Germanic peoples and basically the Indic peoples, masculine. So it's one of those figures of the seven basic figures: the moon, fire, and the counterpart of fire, which would be basic water. In some cases is male, in some cases is female. You have two that are pretty much always female, the earth and the dawn, and two that are pretty much always, the sun is the other one that can be female and male. But you have two that are basically male, that is the principle of light, the Deus figure, and his primal embodiment, the figure of lightning, the weather god.
Right, and which is interesting because, you have the cognates, and then, it's never been clear if Zeus and Thor, or Zeus and Odin are sort of cognates, but they're both sort of serving the same function. And obviously stories change and characters change as people move, but
yes.
I never realized until recently that Zeus came from Deus. And I saw this other evolution of language from, I believe, a Proto Indo European language where father was like Peter, and it moved on to Pater, to Vader, which, Darth Vader, sheesh, to father. And you can sort of trace how the language changes, but you can see the roots. Yeah, and that was very interesting. I also, through this show, learned a little bit about Chinese magic and Chinese paganism, which, they're one and the same, really, which is another thing I've learned, is that magic and religion is often one and the same. But they also had a dualism to begin with, which offshot into 5 essential elements. And there's a lot of commonality there. Now, I'm not trying to compare, say these things also went further eastward as well, because I'm not that smart. But it is interesting that there's sort of a lot of similarities everywhere. And the creation myth is so similar to the Greek creation myth, which is so similar to the Norse and Germanic creation myth, which is closer to the Indo-European one because of the cow. The cow is the bizarre part. There's often a giant and a cow and some type of sacrifice of body parts to create other things. But, in quite a few, I guess it's not that bizarre because the cow was probably life. That was how humans lived. On the cow. That was your wealth. That was everything.
In India, the cow is referred to as mother very often.
Oh, wow.
And there it is.
Between the cow and rain, though, that probably explains why those were the two most important things. The milk, food, and the rain for your water, and the grass to feed the cow. And there's your cycle. I have 2 questions for you. I'm not sure and these are sort of observations which I think are interesting. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're trite. Maybe they are. But and somebody out there is going to get mad at me, but this is Garden of Doom, so we don't fear that. So it seems to me in the duality, in a lot of the religions, the duality is gods and twins. Isis and Osiris, Apollo and I think Athena or Artemis, and there were others. There's Enlil and Enki, which but then there was a sister also. Anyway, that's not the important part. But it seems to me that in the Abrahamic religions, they sort of switch. The evolution is that the twins are not gods, but man, Adam and Eve. Those are your twins.
And all right, where do you want to go with that?
I don't know I'm not sure. Just when we were talking, it sort of struck me along with another thing, and then maybe you can figure out where to go with it, or just say, "No, that's silly, Jeff." But the other one was that and that seems like the evolution to Christianity. I know that there's probably a bunch that people think are very significant, but in this context, it seems to me that the main difference is that when you got to a son of God in Christianity, he's not trying to kill his father. Which, is like all the other religions, like someone's either trying to kill the father or take over for the father. Jesus doesn't seem to be, sort of merges with the father, but not, there's no killing, there's no patricide, there's no usurpation. So those are my two little, because I don't think there's that much difference between most pagan religions and most monotheistic religions, not as many as people would like to believe. But I'm thinking those are two sort of major tweaks to the stories.
All right. Basically, I think if we're looking at the world's religions, there's and these aren't really classifications. This is using the sociological tool known as the ideal type, and how that works is there's an essential ideal, and we use it as a measuring device. And so we look at any given religion and which of the ideals does it conform the closest to, where does it fall short from that ideal, and that then gives us the impetus to try to explain why it's different and how it's different. But the basic four types would be the Abrahamic religions. So you have Judaism, Christianity, Islam, maybe some of Sikhism, but Sikhism is usually considered a dharmic religion. And the primary two dharmic religions are Hinduism and Buddhism. Paganism, I think, is a third type of religion. But you also have what we could call the secular religions. And basically all peoples take a position in trying to compare what they consider to be the Godhead or the divine, humanity, and the world, and what the relationship between them is. With the core thing with the Dharmic religions is the world, physicality is an illusion. It's something that one endeavors to be free from, to escape from. And that's kind of a Gnostic position. It's Gnostic, the Gnostic, and a lot of pagans are Gnostic as well. I mean, with paganism, it's very hard to say. I mean, anyone who says they're pagan, that's basically all that is required. But there are many different types of pagans, and I basically distinguish between Gnostic pagans and Telluric pagans. Telluric pagans see the earth, see matter as real, as not something to escape from, but to something to celebrate, to participate with, to revere the earth, revere nature, and ultimately in our day and age to protect nature, to protect the environment, and stop this kind of destruction that we're doing, and we're actually killing our own mother. Gnostic paganism and Gnostic religion in itself basically sees us as being created by some transcendent mind, some transcendent consciousness. And there's kind of an evolutionary or a chain of being at which matter and our being incorporated in matter is the lowest on the ladder. And the basic purpose in Gnosticism is to free oneself from the illusion of matter or the entanglement of matter and to re-merge with the primordial one. And so your Abrahamic religions are essentially Gnostic in that sense. Some of the pagan religions are. The difference between basically what I would call the telluric pagan tradition and secularism is that they both accept this life, focus on this world, maybe the here and now, maybe the future as well. But the difference between the two is that in paganism there is this sense or understanding of magic, of enchantment, of wonder as almost something that exists in addition. It's the other world. It's the twin of us in the other world, and it works with that. With secular religion, there's no supernatural. It's denied. The whole focus is this world, and so pagans can relate to humanism and even agnosticism and even atheism on that basis of at least we're both sharing an understanding of the importance, if not sacredness, of the earth, of nature, of physicality, of tangibility, and so forth. There's Christianity kind of reversed the succession myth in that, in a sense, Jesus Christ, of course, the church councils identified God the Father and God the Son as part of one being. And again, there still is the sacrifice. In this case, it's the Son that gets sacrificed rather than the Father. But then you have, in the whole progression of things, Islam is really restoring the Father. It sees Christianity and Christ as kind of the usurper Son, who to some degree succeeds in Christianity. It's a different formulation than Judaism. And Islam is kind of the restoration of the primacy of the Father and the elimination of the Son. So I see that kind of succession theme at work, each being interpreted in different respects by the cultures. And then, of course, within these four different blocks, you have every kind of splintering interpretation. So the Abrahamic religions are, well, I don't know if they exceed paganism in diversity, but there's much more, I think, because of the Abrahamic God as being something that's other than our earth, other than nature. I see it basically as a negative concept, and it has certainly, it's very powerful, but that negative concept at the heart of these Abrahamic religions, you have this entity, Jehovah, Allah, God, whatever he's called, but there's a divisiveness in that figure, and that's why I think even in Islam, you have the feud between Sunni and Shia. Christianity, you had the feud between Protestants and Catholics, and within the Protestant denominations, there's even more dissension and divergence. So I think that kind of dynamic that you find in the Abrahamic religions kind of is the consequence of the type of thing that they exalt as divinity. And that's quite different it's different than Abrahamic. Of course, you don't have an exaltation of divinity as such for the secular things. But the pagan thing is primarily, even when you have Gnostic pagans, they still cherish nature. They still cherish the earth and to a degree tangibility. They may still see that one has to escape from it, but there still is the valuing of that. And so there's more implicit harmony at least potentially, between the divergences of paganism than we have been able to witness historically, at least, with the Abrahamic religions. Now, whether that answered any of your issues.
I'm not sure if it did or if it didn't, but it was very interesting. I know very little about Islam, and that's on my list of things to do and experts to find. I guess beget guess, and I and then sometimes guess beget guess that put me into diversions, onto different paths. But I'll get there. So, and it never occurred to me that Islam might be, at some core, the retaking of power by the father figure. Because you're right. Most Christians say Jesus. As synonymous with God. So it is maybe it's a more genteel, usurpation than say, castrating your father and sending him to Tartarus, but that's interesting. We didn't talk about the twin thing as maybe Adam and Eve being human versions of the twins. I'm not sure how important that is. I'm not even sure if I'm right on that. But I'll give you a moment if you want to comment on that. If not, we can move on to sort of paganism and I guess a comparative paganism, or wherever you were going to go next.
All right. Well, Adam and Eve, I suppose they could be considered twins. I mean, she is created out of Adam's rib. I think the primordial twins are usually brothers, but then at various points and in different cultures, they become a brother and a sister, as with Apollo and Artemis. Probably an earlier understanding of the divine twins in Greece are Castor and Pollux, those two. But even more fundamentally behind that would be Apollo and Dionysus operate as probably early instances of the divine twin concept. Adam and Eve are usually, at least with the Indo Europeans, the primal human figure is Manu for the Vedics, and I think it's the same with the Persians, the Iranians. Manus, I think, among the Scandinavians or the Nordics, and the twin is like with Castor and Pollux, is the one who dies. Yama, he becomes the lord of the underworld. Yama's equivalent, Yama means twin, and the primordial giant killed by the gods to create the world in the Scandinavian mythology is Ymir, which also means twin.
Right.
They're both cognates. And so that was probably the earlier idea, is that our humanity is both this worldly and is exemplified basically with our mind, almost a personification of the mind, and then wisdom, but also our being after this world, in the other world. And the two were considered they're twins. Sometimes they feud as Romulus and Remus did, and they were trying to contest over who had the right to Roma, the goddess. And so sometimes the one of the brothers kills the other brother, and that's what puts the other brother in the other world as the other being. But sometimes it happens not through the one brother, but the other one dies for various reasons. But there's usually a love between the two at heart. The Castor and Pollux, you have a Roman duality and you have the Dioscuric duality, and one is more harmonious than the other. But those are later developments.
Didn't Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades just sort of draw straws?
they're really originally the same being. Poseidon probably means Posei, Lord, and Don, Earth, the Lord of the Earth. Well, that's exactly what Zeus is. And Hades, there is a Greek term, Zeus, Katathonius, Zeus of the underworld. And so it's really, it's the ubiquity of the Deus figure, but functionally and ultimately then reified into separate mythological beings is what we have with the Greeks. But again, you were talking, the Deus figure among the Romans is Jupiter. And the Jew part comes from the same root of Deus and Deus among the Vedics and so forth. And then you have just the Pater principle added to the name. So you have Jupiter, but you also have Zeus Pater and so forth. Deus Pater among the Vedics.
That's wild.
All right, interestingly then, all right, I'll just throw this part out. The cognate of Zeus, Jupiter, Deus among the Nordic peoples is Tyr, or Tiwaz among the Germanic-speaking peoples. And he was originally a weather god. He's the god of light and sky. But among the Nordic peoples, he's demoted or overthrown really by Odin. Odin is kind of a figure. There's a whole school of thought now developing on the idea that Odin came with the aristocratic conquerors that came from the south and basically took over the Northlands, where Thor is really an offshoot, like Indra is an offshoot of the sky figure, more directly connected with the weather and with thunder and lightning. But then when Odin then is being exalted in the north, probably rather forcefully at first, it's a later figure. One of the things that when I did my book, The Divine versus the Assyrian, the thing that I was able to uncover was you had the gods, the deities, the devas, the divine, but opposed to them is the whole principle of chaos, of nothingness, of the void. You have a similar type of thing among the Mesopotamians, where you have the Tiamat, who is a personification of chaos, a female personification, who wants to destroy the gods because they're making too much noise and are disturbing her peace and so forth. Among the Indo-Europeans, they have that same kind of a divide in which chaos or nothingness tries to destroy the gods. Usually that nothingness is personified as a dragon. And so one of the fundamental myths of the Proto Indo Europeans is the Deus principle subduing the dragon, and establishing the order of nature, of light, of divinity over the void or chaos of nothingness. And so you see that existing through many of the different Indo-European daughter cultures. And there was something else I was going to add, but I've lost it. So
Odin always seemed to me, and this might be the kid in me and when I was discovering these things, but Odin always seemed to me more as almost like a Gandalf figure or a Merlin figure, more Celtic than Norse warrior. Is it possible that there's the Celtic sort of the Druidical influence, and those were those southern influences that took over? Because I was aware of the Tyr thing. I just thought that Tyr became the god of war in Norse mythology, and
he's also the real ethical principle, because he sacrificed his head. All right, so you in this battle between the Deus figure and the dragon, there's a point where the dragon overcomes the Deus figure. Among the Hittite weather god, I think he steals his heart. Zeus loses his sinews. Another one, he's lost his eyes. And so as the myth completes, eventually the Deus figure regains his missing parts. It's kind of like Nuada among the Irish. He loses his arm, and so he's no longer can be the king of the Tuatha De Danann until he has an arm restored, either his silver arm or one of the physicians actually restores his living arm, and then he becomes the king again. So in the completion of that myth, the Deus figure regains his missing part. Indra, who runs from Vitra the dragon, regains his courage and ultimately comes back and combats and is a victor, is ultimately the victor in that situation. But there's a temporary dismemberment of the divine figure. It's not just a total ascendancy. It has its setback and it has to regain its own strength. Now, I think it's Terry Gunnell from University of Iceland is the one who basically traces the importation of the Odinic figure from the south. But the south were basically Celtic people, so there might be a Celtic connection there, whether Odin is actually Celtic or not. But the interesting thing is, Tyr, who would have been originally the Deus figure king of the gods in the north, has been demoted. He's lost his hand, so he can't be the divine leader. And so it's a temporary usurpation by the forces of chaos, which I think Odin represents. But the myth has never been completed, and so you don't have the restoration of Tyr. You still have the dragon on the throne with the Odinic complex. I know this is controversial, but it's how I see it when you do a real comparative mythological study.
So if the Germanic and Norse myths are the truth, then we're still waiting for a reckoning from Tyr, and things are going to change.
Yeah, hopefully. And I think that's probably part of our problem, and why we're out of balance with nature, why we're out of balance with the earth, because we don't have the proper understanding, the proper valuing as we would if we were more connected to our ancestral roots, to the understanding of value and divinity of the world, of nature, of physicality, of matter.
Something that you said early on in your presentation when you were talking about your trajectory was that you agreed to head the astrology department, but not that it was discussed as fact, but to how it influences things. And the funny thing is, I don't know. I didn't know anything about astrology. I mean, people, I knew that there were more than one zodiac. I didn't exactly know why. And, and people got their fortunes, and I hear things like, retrograde and this and that and the other thing. But through the course of doing the show, I've been introduced to it, sometimes not even expecting to be introduced to it. And now and luckily, I now understand exactly what you mean by that. Because a lot of these stories, people will say that the stars told the people the stories informed. I think the people looked to the stars and, built this, retrofitted the stories into the stars, and it helped to keep track of things. But what I think really is important, is that sort of the approach that you took at a very high level in heading that department?
Basically, yes. I wasn't trying to prove astrology. I was just trying to study how their behavior is modified or influenced by their belief in the stars. So you have to look at the particular astrological systems. Now you have a sidereal system and you have a tropical system, and they're similar, but they're slightly out of sync. And so in India, you have one system, in Europe and America, you have a different system. I don't know why it works. I think I think culturally, we learn to understand what various configurations are supposed to mean. So, me being a Virgo, somebody, Ava Gardner being a Capricorn, whether we're conscious of it or not, I think culturally we're influenced by the cultural expectation of how the stars are supposed to influence our behaviors. I don't know if that's something that even could be proved, but again, it's how people react. Now, in the 60s, before you even often exchanged names with someone you met, you asked what was their sign, and it was a way of exchanging a lot of information with somebody else on an immediate basis. It was fascinating how it worked, and it was kind of the lingua franca of the day. It's been, of course, astrology has been put down by empirical science. I learned astrology initially as based on empirical observations, and I had, when I was at San Francisco State getting my MA degree, there was a kind of a scientific methodology. I called it a brainwashing course, but it was Gerald Lastrucci was the professor, and basically we were learning what scientific methodology involved, the methodological approach, the value neutrality, the objectivity, and so forth. And I asked Dr. Lastrucci at one point, I said, astrology claims to be based empirically on observation. Does that allow it to become potentially a science? And he said, absolutely. And so that helped me then understand methodology, and I'm very comfortable with it. Now, that all being said, when I became then the head of this cultural astronomy and astrology department at Boston University, most of the students were astrologers. And I realized through them that they basically are Platonic in the sense that they have this understanding of a system which is then applied to what they see, and they interpret behavior in that pre-established system. So it's not something that's being based strictly on observation. It's more applicability of some kind of external, in this case, let's say Platonic framework. And so, of course, I had a lot of trouble with that. And but that's the way I think astrology basically operates in our world today. It used to be taught in universities up until maybe 17th century. I think in Spain was one of the last universities to actually teach astrology. Part of the idea of formulating that department in Bospa was to reestablish astrology from an academic point of view. Popular astrology, what you read in the horoscopes and the newspapers and whatnot, it works in the sense that it makes a lot of people wealthy. I wondered why, among the students I had, a lot of them were professional astrologers, and the thing was that they made good livings from either writing horoscope columns or doing horoscopes for various clients. So there was money behind it. So it's a phenomenon that's part of our society. It doesn't necessarily fit with our agnostic, atheistic, scientific prevalent framework, but it's still there. And people have this need for this kind of counter belief systems. Another thing with that being said is that I have found that the prognosis system, you can go to Indonesia and they can feel the bumps on your head. Or I had a palmist read my palm in Laguna Beach once, and I had another one from India read my palm. And whatever system is used, they usually come up with the same sort of analysis, and they tell you the same thing. So it's almost as if something is there, and these different formulations, whether it's astrology or the bump reading or palmistry, they access whatever it is through a different route, but they come up to the same conclusions. And I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah.
I just find it fascinating.
I was going to ask that, but that's a fair enough answer. You used two words, sidereal and another word. What's the difference between?
Tropical. Let's see if I can explain that. One, the sidereal is based on the movement of the stars, and so there's the precession of the equinoxes, and the tropical is taking the Earth as the basis. So when you do a horoscope, well, I guess that's true in both systems, but what they're trying to establish is it takes you as the center of the cosmos, or at least the center of our solar system, and plots the position of the planets and the angle that they form using to you as a triangle. So that's whether it's a square or opposition or a conjunction. It's taking you as the very center. With the tropical system, the sky is divided up between the different 12 zodiacal signs, but there is a precession of the equinoxes, and so those signs have shifted. The tropical system doesn't take on board that shift, whereas the sidereal, since it's focused on the stars themselves, has shifted. So Aries is slightly out of sync with the Aries that we understand. Capricorn is out of sync. They're all out of sync to maybe 10 degrees or something like that. So you would think that would influence, it would give you a different interpretation. They tend to come up somehow. I guess there's some kind of an automatic built-in compensation factor that operates in there, but they come up with basically the same types of analyses, the same type of predictions, that sort of thing.
Do they all have 12?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
See, I wonder about that because, I've heard about the argument that there's a 13th constellation, and somebody even said there should be a 14th. And, you just do the math. You do, the phases of the moon is 28 days. So, that leaves another, 4 weeks, that's 48 weeks, and the year is 52 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. And, the one that I understand that got kicked out is, I always say it wrong, but it's basically the serpent bearer. And our serpent is always the bad guy, right? The serpent's the bad guy. Even in the Proto European one, the three-headed serpent was like the first villain. Also to represent woman, which, I guess that's another story altogether. Or maybe it isn't. But, I don't know. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but why is it that everybody kicked out the poor serpent and the guy who supplanted is me, the Scorpio, which is like in the sky for like 7 days, not even close to like 28 days, or so I understand it.
Well, no, I don't know if that part's true, but
okay.
My family, they were really militant feminists, and they were screaming and ranting and raving the fact that the Patriarchal Society had eliminated the 13th sign, Arachne, the spider, and that was the put down of the female. And my counter to them, I said, if you look at astrology, it's 12 signs, 6 male signs, 6 female signs. It's a balanced concept. It's a balanced understanding. But because of your militant feminism, you want to unbalance that balance and bring in a 13th sign, so you have 7 female signs and only 6 male signs. That did quiet them down. They never brought that one up again. But
so what you're saying is that I am a militant feminist. That is the first time. That's probably the first time anyone's ever said. It's cool. This is the 21st century. I'm okay with that.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? See, world. I told you I'm progressive.
What was that?
I'm saying SeaWorld. I told you I was progressive.
Yeah,
yes. I'm entirely okay with that. Anyway, I'm going to stop myself right here on that. So, okay. I probably sidetracked you off something with the astrology thing. I guess I want to tie the telluric paganism in with, is that like more similar to what we would call animistic paganism?
Yes, it certainly includes animism. But telluric is from tellus, meaning it's the Latin word for earth. And so it's the telluric paganism is the earth-centered. Earth is the origin, or matter is the origin, nature is the origin. It's not seen as something created by some transcendent mind. Consciousness is something that evolves from the matter-energy complex. It's not something that created it. It's an evolutionary development, and perhaps we, ultimately move into a purely a mental realm. I mean, if we destroy ourselves on Earth, do we still exist in the cosmos? That's a possibility. But when we're talking about origins, our consciousness and then our collective consciousness is something that has developed as life, matter, animation. All those things have developed through the progress of nature, creating more and more differentiated forms of reflection, which I think is what consciousness ultimately comes down to. So if you think about our evolutionary process, as you have your animal kingdom, and within the animal kingdom you have humanity, maybe dolphins and porpoises, and maybe a few other species develop what we would call consciousness, or a kind of a mental reflection. But when we are injured, we go into a coma. We have been reduced essentially to a vegetative state. And so that's a kind of a lower evolutionary state. But then if we then die, we are reduced even further to a mineral state. But I see that as mineral bliss. I see that it's not consciousness. We become just pure matter and the bliss of matter. There's not pain. There's not really even pleasure as we know it in our physical sense. But we're in a pure primordial state of bliss. As we develop consciousness, we become more acutely aware of the differentiation between pleasure and pain. And that's part of what consciousness is to discern those different states of being. But I see it all as kind of organically interconnected. Whether the free soul continues with a consciousness in the other world, on another dimension, whatever, that's one possibility. But if we just decompose back into matter, we decompose back into a blissful, transconscious state of being. So I see them both as positives.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, or we are stardust. Either way it works, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So it's all part of the cycle as how it's supposed to be. What should I ask you that I haven't asked you?
Oh. Where are we today? Where is this world going? And I'm not sure. I mean, I'm in my final years of life. I've had a wonderful life, and I really am utterly grateful and thankful for what I've been able to experience, the loved ones I've had, and all that. And so, in a sense, I don't know how much more, what I can do to actually help this world. And as you get to this point, there's a sort of a divine or blissful detachment. It seems to me that if we could actually connect between all our different selves and our different cultures and our different perspectives or outlooks, recognize what we have in common and how dependent we are on this planet for our very existence, for our very being. If there was somehow we could operate on that basis, and I'm not sure how we can with the types of super states we have and the bureaucracies that we have and the military conflicts and buildups that we have, but it seems to me that we have to be on a verge of some sort of collective awakening. Whether these protests in Iran and where are some of the other ones, if those will, I guess Pakistan at this point, if that type of a spirit can become more global, and I think for me, my spirituality, my pagan spirituality, supports that. It's a belief in magic, in the possibility that there is something that we need that is not right within our empirical grasp, but may be influential and helpful at the same time. We have to do the physical work to create a different consciousness, a prevailing consciousness. And I think that's the task. I think one of the reasons why paganism has been reborn in our times, at least in the West, when as you grow older and your parents reach their end of their days, you start to appreciate them maybe in ways that you hadn't when you were younger. You love them, yes, but you take them for granted when you realize they're not going to last that much longer. There is a much deeper mindfulness and care for the parent. And I think that's what's happening collectively on the planet with what we're doing with the Earth. The Earth is reaching, maybe the Earth won't die as we know it, but as the source of our life, and as Gaia that we know.
No, it will die as we know it. It won't die.
Yes. Well, eventually it will anyhow. Yes.
Well, sure.
But in our own time, and then within later in this century, we're going to be really in a really difficult place. I think that our witnessing that is part of why there is this rebirth of a spirituality that really is grounded in nature, values and reveres nature, and wants to protect the natural balance of nature.
Right. I probably should have asked this earlier before we got into that, because that was actually a pretty good closing thought train. But how similar or different are the proto-pagan beliefs or pagan beliefs from, let's just say, the steppe, Central Asia into Europe, as to the First Nations of North and South America?
Oh, I see them as very similar. They have different reifications of divinity or gods or whatnot, but they're both grounded in physicality, in the elements, in nature, and I think the Native American in it said, well, they had made some ecological mistakes, and I guess they deforested and they killed a lot of the buffalo or bison. So there was someone can make a case that they weren't perfect, but they certainly were much better than we have been. And we are destroying.
Yeah. I mean, so kill the bison, say, hold my beer, It's like...
well, we completed that task, and we destroyed many of the forests, as the British did in Ireland and Britain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we look at our ancestors, and again, there was much more of a shared valuing of things that they shared with Native Americans, with indigenous peoples throughout the world.
Give me a song that should be our outro. I've used Share the Land before, so I can't use it again. I feel like the song The Love and Spoonful, I think it is, Do You Believe in Magic, seems a little trite. What song do you think I should use for this one?
Ooh, it has to have words?
It doesn't have to, but, I think if there's no words and no tune, people will just skip it. Which is not that important. They've already come to the end, so, it's...
All right. My favorite piece of music is Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe, and there aren't words. There is singing, but it's dance. It's a dance, and I think that's what we have to learn to do, is to dance with each other, to dance with life, dance with nature. And I get often tired with a lot of the pagan chants because they're boring and they're repetitive. And if you go to an evangelical church, their music is much more exciting and engaging. And I think contemporary Western paganism misses a lot of that. I really love the Daphnis and Chloe. It's a beautiful story, and it just engages with nature and with dance.
Well, who am I to reject this one simple request for an outro? So, anyway, fascinating conversation. I understood most of it. Not that I fully grasped all of it, but I haven't studied my entire life on this. Thank you so much for being on. You're welcome anytime. I hope this was a pleasant enough experience for you, and I'm glad we got the technology to work. And I think, is there anything that you want to promote? I know that you're looking forward to having your books possibly published this year, but this is a free...
The book is called Matter Matters, and the subtitle, I think, is a end-of-life perspective on paganism. It probably will come out with Amazon. I think that's where we're headed, but I don't know how to promote it. That's something else. But anyhow, it's been a pleasure to converse with you, Jeff, and I've enjoyed this very, very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. One way to promote is guesting on podcasts, and there's lots of podcasts that are esoteric, and a lot of them are bigger than mine. But once you start listening to some, the algorithm will give you searches for others, and you can sort of see their reach and pick and choose. So that might be a good way to do it. And who doesn't want a university professor that's also a pagan on their show? I mean, it's like a Las Vegas buffet. It's amazing. So anyway, Matter Matters. Look for it on Amazon. Thank you once again for coming to Garden of Doom. And folks, check out his stuff. It's Professor Michael York. And hopefully we'll hear from you again next week, or you'll hear from us again, more importantly, in the Garden of Doom.